From Munich, we got the train through the Brenner Pass all the way to Bolzano, and that was our destination for the start of the hike and the meeting of all the other members of the group. Bolzano is in the northern part of Italy and also part of the Tyrol. It's the gateway to the Dolomites. It's a very pleasant city, very walkable and surrounded by mountains and hills, and has a couple of chairlifts that go straight out of the city. Our first day was just a walkabout, make sure our boots still worked after the journey, and we went up to Oberbosen, which is in the hills above Bolzano. One of the great things that we noticed straight away was everybody had beautiful flowers. It was the first time we'd seen a sculpture, this one of a goat taking a selfie, but we couldn't resist to ride it. This also gave us the opportunity to look around and see firsthand the Dolomites that we would be heading for in the next few days and hiking in. Bolzano is also the home of Otzi the Iceman. He was a mummified hunter from 5,300 years ago. He was discovered in 1991 high up in the Alps just north of Bolzano on the border between Austria and Italy. A significant amount of research has been done on him, and there's a whole museum dedicated to him. And this is an image of what a reconstruction, basically, of what they believe he looked like before he died. Well, we were going to leave Bolzano and next head over to Selva, hike around there, and then on to Covara, then up to the Refugio Lagazzoni, and then on to Cortina. We took the bus round to a valley called Val Gardena, and then took the lift up into this valley, and then hiked along until we could drop down into Selva.
You're on your own.
Not anything. I guess some of the phones are.
More and more now.
Okay.
As you can see, beautiful weather, and we're going to head down to this Refugio for lunch. You don't have to carry any food because they serve sandwiches, and you can also get a beer. Beautiful flowers, and the trails are well marked here. You'll notice they're not in miles but in time to complete, and thought this was an interesting sign for cyclists not to tangle with vehicles. Came across quite a few sculptures, wooden carvings on the trails, beautiful, and wouldn't mind this chainsaw, could make good work on some trees with that one. We're dropping down now into the town of Selva, where we'll be spending a few nights and doing some good hiking around this area. Now this is what you call a real grass cutter. I'll be spending a couple of days walking around and over this massif called Sassalongo. It's a massive chunk of, and it's all limestone rock here, with very vertical walls. Very, very spectacular. Traversing around below these limestone cliffs that soared for thousands of feet above us, it was very impressive. Some leftover snow and ice in this couloir, and a snow cave you could venture in if you're adventurous, I guess. Bit of an uneasy feeling here that we were being watched. Looking up to the ridge in the distance there will be where we'll be hiking tomorrow, coming through that gap. Well, these mountain huts are really convenient. We can have some lunch and a bit of a stretch out in the sun. The late afternoon sun giving us a very picturesque scene as we complete our hike and head back to our lodging in Selva. Today's hike started at the top of the Sella Pass, and then we take the coffin lift, hike up and through the col on the Langenfell, and then down the other side. This lift, known as the coffin lift, was unique as it had a rear door entry, and you had to run and catch up with it and jump in since it didn't stop, and the attendant pushed you in and closed the door rapidly. Of course, getting out was just as exciting as you had to jump out backwards but run forwards. So now we had to choose which of these routes to take up to the pinnacle. Our route down was through these crags and over these boulders, limestone, again underneath these massive towering 1,000-foot odd cliffs, made you feel very small. The trail now entered a hanging valley comprised of very white limestone shale, which was blinding in the sun, and then before it dropped off steeply again. Just coming into view is the Demet's hut, where we'll be stopping for lunch. It's a hut that's sort of perched right on the edge of the cliff. Now looking back, you can see the hut way up there, and we're descending now. This is Liz, one of the members of the group, and we're heading downhill into the greener pastures of the lower slopes. We always wondered how the hut got resupplied, and we came across the answer. Had a basket that ran up on a cable, and this was the terminus where the supply, and we found all this beer and booze. Not that we actually drank any. So our route lay along the base of these mountains, and then we would cut up over a couple of passes and then drop down into Kovara. Here's the traditional hiking gear, the leather shorts. Ed was going to try and buy a pair of these before he left. Well, we've gained quite a bit of altitude now, and we're going to be heading over one of the passes. Time to take a bit of a breather before we drop down into the next valley and then head over to the next pass. Well, you can see the trail, that's where we've come from. We're heading up to this next pass now.
Far around. Oh, look. Right on the trail, or right on the ridge line there. 20 feet away. See the church?
Well, we're arriving at the col between two valleys now. We're going to heading down one of these to Cavara. Pretty steep descent, and the starting to get cloudy. Well, we started feeling some raindrops and we were hurrying down, and then the heavens just opened and we had a deluge, and then that was followed by hail, large hail by the way. Cavara is dominated by this mountain in the background, Sasonga, and the weather had improved and we did some walkabouts around Cavara for a couple of days before moving on. Today we'll be heading over to the La Tafone group of mountains where Lagazui is, and so it was quite a pleasant hike over a high plateau with this beautiful group of mountains that we were heading towards. So we're going to drop down into the valley here, take a short bus ride up to the top of the pass, Falzarego. From here we get on the tram and head right up to the top of this cliff where you can see the lift house on top. This was a pretty airy ride. We'll be staying at Refugio Lagazzoni at 9,000 feet for the night. It's perched right on the edge of a cliff. Breathtaking. It's surrounded by these wonderful crags, and very spectacular as the sunlight changes in the evening.
Hang on.
Yeah, you can see the huts perched in what seems to be a very precarious position on the edge of a cliff. And we're just panning around here. There's a lot of history here from World War I era with border disputes between Austria and Italy. This is the Austrian side, or was the Austrian side, and this is the old path that the troops used to use in their defenses. This bird known as a chough, sort of a high altitude raven. Rising early to catch the sunrise on the peaks was a real treat. frosty overnight, and these little birds, I think they're snowfinches, not quite sure. Marmolada coming into view there, about 11,000 feet, highest mountain in the Dolomites. After breakfast, it was time to head back down, so we're going to take the tram back down to the valley and then hike over to the other side of the valley up to the Cinque. With our feet back on solid ground again, you can see way back up there where the tram goes, and that's where the refugio was that we stayed overnight. This valley was part of the front line during World War I, at the border between Austria, that's on the far side of the valley there, and this side, which was the Italian side, and they basically had gun entrenchments, and they just used to fire across at each other. So this side is the Cinque, the 5 towers, and it's also a museum. So you can wander around this area where there's the old trenches and bunkers and various historical artifacts left over. These monoliths are also a rock climber's mecca, some sheer walls, hard climbing, and you can see some of the climbers on the wall. Now lunchtime, and then we're going to do our washing, head down the valley and get some transportation round to Cortina. Cortina was the site of the 1956 Winter Olympics, but it's a beautiful town, big ski area in the winter, very popular area, nestled in this valley, surrounded by beautiful peaks. We got a kick out of this notice. It was the emergency evacuation procedure at the hotel. Looked like a complex software flowchart to us. Got a couple of great hikes planned in Cortina area. First, we're going to hike up to a lake in the valley at the back of these mountains, and then the following day going over to the Trecima, very famous climbing area. Just starting at the trailhead, heading up to Lake Sorapis. Supposed to be a beautiful lake. We're going to head up the valley and along some very narrow trails.
Hang on.
Okay.
And benefit to the one. So it's a really good question there.
We have arrived at the refuge Sorapis, around 7,500 feet, and a short walk brings us to this lake, which is surreal. Beautiful turquoise color. I think it's due to the washed down limestone particles in suspension in the lake that give it this color when the sun shines on it. And this is known as the Finger of God, this pinnacle. example here of geological upthrusting on the ridge. We never did find out who these belonged to. After a long hike, some people just keel over, and I don't think Barry realized what was painted on his back here. I think Ed did it. The Trachima, the three pinnacles, great limestone monoliths, popular with climbers, very hard standard of climbing. One of the more popular hikes in the Dolomites. It was very dramatic with the mountains and the clouds swirling and the mist swirling around. This was just in case you missed the trailhead. The hike basically circumnavigates the Trachima, so you'll see various facets of it as we hike around. This is probably the more dramatic view of the three towers, the Trachima.
Why are you behaving like you are, Ivor? Getting us all in trouble.
Yeah, that's
Jeez.
exactly right.
My golly.
You can send all these damn things on Facebook.
Oh, he's
Luckily,
doing
Ivor's an old guy.
panorama.
He doesn't know how to do Facebook.
I know. For LinkedIn and all that, but I had a lot of requests. The rain is...
This was officially the end of our trip. Barry and Ed and Robert decided to stay on a couple more days in Cortina, hike around, and you can see it. Weather had changed. We had snow and a bit of rain. Quite a few of the rest of us took the bus down to Venice, and we were going to fly out of Venice. Well, that's all, folks.